it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen.
Smokeface. Why I found thousands of human bones buried in my property. There's just something about a rainstorm, isn't there? When you're safe inside your home, tucked up warm inside your bed, the sound of the rain outside is so comforting. But, well, not everything's safe and warm, is it? As we shall see in tonight's 3 stories. You know, when the eponymous they tell you that something is too good to be true? It probably is, and you should be very wary of accepting shit at face value. Clichés exist for a reason. I learnt my lesson the hard way when I was inspecting a worn-out leather diary I'd found in my newly purchased vacation home. Now, I'm using that term very loosely here. My dog Ollie came bounding up the creaky wooden stairs with a large rotten bone in his drooling, mud-caked mouth. Initially I'd figured that he'd gone and found the remains of some sort of animal deep in the woods, and the thought of potential predators attacking this friendly little moron started to worry me. But these faint alarms changed into a blaring klaxon when I noticed some ripped fabric hanging from the femur. Long story short, a couple of hours later my property was swarming with cops who were combing each and every inch of my land, especially this one little parcel in a corner near the towering cedar trees where they kept digging up human bones in varying stages of decomposition. Bones, in the plural, like thousands of them. So, this was why this dilapidated piece of trash was sold to me at less than half the price a property like this would usually attract. Not because of the state of disrepair this romantic fixer-upper was in, but because it was the den of some sort of deranged serial killer. Too good to be true indeed. Or, at least that was the initial conclusion both the sheriff and I had independently arrived at. But all our assumptions and preconceived notions turned out to be worthless when we began poring over the contents of the diary. And now that the feds and other shifty dudes in black suits have gotten involved, I really think it's best to get this story out to as many people as I possibly can. Here goes. Entry 1. The house sprung up out of the ground like a bright little oasis in the endless white desert. Tiny flames of hope flickered within me, fighting desperately to sweep aside the overwhelming cold that creeped its way into my very bones. My boots plopped in and out of the sinking ground beneath me as I trudged through the snow that came drifting out of the thick cloud cover the sun had vanished behind. It felt like I'd been wandering these woods for eons, with every muscle in my emaciated body aching as I blindly searched for salvation, which came in the form of this quaint little house in the middle of a clearing in the forest. Relief flooded through my body, pumping my heart faster as I picked up speed as I hobbled towards the house. I think I must have been around 100 yards away when a loud boom echoed around in the vicinity of the house, the intensity of the sound making my knees tremble. I wasn't the only one affected by the gunshot, as I saw some birds fly off into the horizon from their icy perches atop the looming cedar trees in the distance behind the house. I didn't know who had fired the gun, or why he did it, or what he was shooting at. What I did know was that I needed to find shelter, warmth, and food. So I ignored the icy claws of fear clutching at my heart and plodded on. Winter hadn't exactly been kind on the house. A thick layer of snow weighed down the roof as sharp, dagger-like icicles hung from the eave above the front door. I took a deep breath, which formed wispy little clouds in front of my face, and I knocked. "Anybody home?" I shouted. When no one answered, I nudged the door open, and almost instantly my nostrils were assaulted by a stale, musky scent, as if the place had been the residence of dozens of hobos who hadn't bathed in months. I crinkled my nose and stepped in, the loose floorboards groaning and shifting under my weight. A pleasant crackling sound reached my ears, and I noticed wood burning in the fireplace, illuminating the room in a soft yellow glow and casting welcome shadows all around. Grinning, I slammed the door shut and quickly bounced over and sat in front of the fire. My body shivered as warmth washed over me, and I took off my gloves and gleefully rubbed my hands together. The only thing missing now was food, and I wondered, no, prayed that the gunshot I'd heard earlier had been someone hunting for food. But I didn't find the answer to that question that day, as exhaustion and the heat from the fire forcibly dragged me off to a deep slumber. Entry 2. Someone else is in this house with me, and I don't think they're all that friendly. It was the cold that woke me up. The dull orange embers of the dying flames sighed in the fireplace as the blazing life went out of them, allowing the freezing chill to claw its way back into the house. The wind howled as it scraped against the glass windows of the house, making them rattle. Fuck. How long was this snowstorm going to last? My body shivered as I groggily woke up, my neck and shoulders stiff from the awkward position I'd slept in. The rumbling in my stomach reminded me that I still hadn't eaten anything. I don't even remember when I'd last fed. Time and memory are at best hazy for me right now. I scoured the ground floor of the house, rummaging through every drawer and cupboard in sight, but couldn't get my hands on even a morsel of anything edible. After satisfying myself about the lack of food downstairs, I decided to tackle the first floor. My knees exploded in pain as I stomped up the creaky steps, the hunger and exhaustion extracting a heavy toll from my weary body. Finally, my painful and arduous journey came to an end, and I stood on top of the stairs, which opened to a long corridor, and I noticed that the first door on my left was locked from the inside. The hair on the back of my neck sprang up straight as I tried to contemplate the implications of this locked door. Who was inside this room? Had they always been there, even when I first came to this place? Maybe it was the gunman who'd come back from his hunt. But then why didn't he wake me up? And where was the animal he was hunting? Did he fail in his hunt, or did he drag the carcass upstairs when I was asleep? I shook my head to clear my mind of the fog that had materialized in there by the swirling storm of questions, and knocked. No response. "Is anyone in there?" I whispered, my parched throat not allowing me to raise my voice. So I cleared my throat and spoke loudly. "Are you there? Come on out." I knocked again. "Come on out. Sorry for barging into you." An inhuman, guttural shriek cut me off. The next second, something impossibly heavy slammed against the locked door, and I stumbled and fell backwards. My heart pounded in my chest as my mouth let out little puffs of vapor like a damn steam locomotive. What the fuck was that? The door shook. Dust came flying off the wooden frame as whoever or whatever was in there crashed into the door again, and again, while screeching its unholy lungs out. Jesus Christ. What if that gunshot I'd heard earlier was someone trying to kill this thing? Then I heard metal sliding against metal as the heavy latch was pulled back on the other side. Not wanting to face whatever was in there, I jumped up, locked the door on my end, and raced downstairs, leaping over multiple steps at a time. The screaming grew louder and angrier as the person, or thing, realized it had been locked in there. It slammed into the door with renewed rage and frustration, making the door bend and moan, terrifying me that it would break. But miraculously, it held on. I hid in a corner of one of the bedrooms downstairs, and it's here that I found this diary, on top of the bed. I've been using it to record my experiences in this place, though I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay here. It doesn't seem safe. I need to get out of here. Entry 3. I saw it. I saw the thing that lives here today. The banging and the screaming continued for hours, robbing me of any chance of sleep and shooting spine-tingling fear right into my veins. I've been drifting in and out of consciousness the whole day, night, whatever it is. The relentless snowstorm and my exhaustion have made me lose all sense of time. Even writing in this diary seems surreal, as if my hand is moving of its own accord, paying no heed to the cold that has turned it pale blue in colour as it scribbles on this paper in a manic frenzy. Am I even writing anything? Is this shit even fucking legible? Or is it all in my head? And why am I writing anyway? It's as if something is compelling me to pen my thoughts, overriding the instinct to question the need of doing so. The cold was getting unbearable. I needed to go back in front of the fire to keep both it and myself going. The shouts and the bangs had faded somewhat, not in their actual intensity, but in how my brain perceived them, going from a mortal threat to more of a menacing danger that lurked in the not-so-distant background, present but manageable. This turned out to be a big mistake, because as I came close to the fireplace, that door burst open, and I saw him on top of the stairs, looking down at me. He didn't seem human. I really don't know how else to say it. His face was obscured by some strange mist, but I could see his eyes, wide and blood-red, as if every vein in his eyeball had popped and flooded the cornea with thick, crimson blood. As those monstrous eyes locked onto mine, he let out a blood-curdling screech, and I bolted out of there, locking myself back in my freezing haven. Entry 4. I'm so hungry. It feels like there is some eldritch, ravenous beast writhing in my belly, scratching wildly at the thin walls of my stomach. It was the hunger that finally pushed me to get up and go search for food again, even though I know there's nothing to be found here. Stars danced in front of my eyes as I staggered onto my feet, but I shook my head and pressed on. As I lumbered out of my room, I noticed something from the corner of my eye. The door upstairs was wide open. My gut tightened as I saw it. Was the Smokeface monster still in there? Or had he run off? Jesus, what if there's food in that room? Hunger and fear clashed within me in a desperate battle for supremacy. My stomach growled. Hunger had won. So I grit my teeth, clenched my fists, and walked upstairs. To my utter elation, he wasn't in the room, but to my disappointment, neither was there anything edible in it. But I did find something else. There was a hunting rifle, propped up against a wall, and a knife, with a box of ammunition right next to it. A couple of meters to the left, the words, "Kill Smokeface," were etched on an empty wooden cupboard, as if someone had carved them on there with a knife. Probably with the knife lying on the floor next to the gun. Well, I'd barely grabbed the gun when I heard footsteps downstairs, heavy boots that bent the floorboards beneath them. I did what anyone else would have. I locked the door on my side and sat facing it with the gun in my lap. Smokeface and I had effectively switched positions. Entry 5. I think I'd fallen asleep or was at the very least snoozing for an indeterminate amount of time when I woke with a start, my heart thudding in my chest. I hate everything. I hate the cold. I hate the hunger. I hate being too cowardly to go down and shoot that fucking thing. I hate not getting any sleep. I hate not knowing how long I'll be stuck here. I angrily stomped on the floor, frustrated at my cowardice and my hopeless situation. I took the knife and carved on and over the words already etched on the cupboard, as if strengthening my resolve. Next time I see him, I'll kill him and eat him if it's the only way I'll survive this goddamn storm. Now, the opportunity came to me quickly indeed. I heard the back door groan loudly as it was swung open, and I quickly leapt to the window, looking down on it. Smokeface stumbled out, his spindly legs jerking and moving in an abnormal manner as he shuffled through the snow. I swore under my breath, brought the gun up to my shoulder, and aimed down the sight. "Hey, asshole!" I screamed as he neared the tall cedar trees. He turned, his face veiled by a thick layer of falling snow and that abominable smoke. The gun rocked in my hand, and a loud boom later, that fucker fell over backwards, finally ending this nightmare. I sighed as I looked at the horizon, dotted by the birds that had flown away from their icy perches atop the towering cedar trees with the gunshot. It was a very beautiful sight. Entry 6. I jinxed it all by talking about it too soon. I hadn't even finished writing about it when I heard someone shouting downstairs, this time from the front door. God, it can't be. He can't still be alive. Not after I just shot him in the head. I should probably go downstairs and check, but I can't. I'm too fucking terrified. Entry 7. I spent the next several hours in a tense silence, just watching the door, wondering what the hell was happening in this house. Just when it looked like my heart was settling into a manageable rhythm, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming up the stairs. I clutched the gun close to my chest and waited. The door rattled as something knocked on it. Soon I heard a voice reverberating through the closed door and piercing my soul with its unholy familiarity. "Anyone in there? Come on out," it shouted, the loud voice bouncing around the walls and slamming into my eardrums. "Come on out," the demonic voice rang loud, as if playfully taunting me. I screamed, giving in to my fear, not caring how pathetic I looked screeching like that. I then kicked at the door with all my might, the action sending adrenaline pumping into my body. Fuck this. I'm going to send every bullet flying down this creature's throat. I pulled the latch open and got ready to shoot this thing full of holes. But to my dismay, it was now locked from the outside, effectively trapping me here. But I didn't give up. I tossed my gun aside and slammed into the door, and again and again. For hours I crashed over and over into this door, trying my hardest to destroy this thing, until it finally moaned and gave out, making me stumble outside. As I got back up on my feet, I noticed him on the bottom of the stairs, watching me with his menacing bloodshot eyes, his face hazy with the smoke. I shrieked and ran back inside, jumping out of the open window in fright. Entry 8. I broke my leg when I jumped out. You'd think the snow would have cushioned my fall, but I guess I must have misjudged its thickness. Oh, hell. Who am I kidding? I wasn't thinking at all when I leapt out of the window. The fear had temporarily robbed me of all capacity of rational thought, with primal fear the only thing in the driving seat of my nervous system. Pain exploded in my leg, which twisted at an impossible angle as it snapped with a fall, and I passed out on the spot. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious, but it must have been quite a while, because I had to dig my way out of the snow that had fallen on my cold body, covering it like a thin shroud. I was freezing, and my breath was coming out as thin, wispy clouds as the storm continued to rage on. I should be dead, but by some divine intervention I was still kicking. Gingerly getting on my good leg, I hobbled back into the house, my broken foot throbbing maddeningly. After I'd rekindled the flickering flames in the fireplace, I realized, with a sinking feeling in my chest, that my room upstairs was now shut. How? I shattered it right out, taking it off its hinges. How is it okay now? I shuddered as I thought about how Smokeface was now not just still alive, but also in possession of the gun. I can't stay here. He's going to kill me. Sooner or later, he's going to get me and make me suffer. I'm going to run away, go out the back door and keep moving in the direction I'd originally been walking in. Maybe I'll find some salvation somewhere out there. I can't stay here. I just can't. This is the last entry I'm making in this diary, because as soon as I've regained some energy, I'm going to run for it. I would have dismissed this diary as the nonsensical ramblings of a madman, if it hadn't been for the conversation I'd had with the sheriff a couple of days later. He got in touch with some feds he was friends with and found out some very interesting things, like the fact that all the DNA samples taken from the bones they dug up were completely identical. It seems like the government was running some sort of a messed up experiment with clones. But for what? To see whether the same things get repeated over and over, like a time loop without the benefit of hindsight? To study free will? Do we have free will? Or are we just corks bobbing away in the endless sea of causality? I guess we'll never know. Coldspot. It appeared one day in the doorway of our bedroom, without any warning or announcement, as if it had always been there. I was the one who found it. It was early morning, the darkness hadn't yet dissipated, and I was getting ready to go out for a jog, trying hard not to disturb my wife's soft snores as I slipped my shoes on. I got up, stretched my legs, and began creeping out of the room, when I felt it at the back of my neck. A sudden burst of cold air, nipping at the flesh of my neck, causing goosebumps to spring up in alarm. I gasped as tremors ran through my body. What the fuck? I took a step back, and there it was. Icy cold wind, like the breath of an ice dragon being exhaled by the wooden frame of the door. Where did it come from? Was there something wrong with the plumbing? I scanned the walls. No dampness in the walls anywhere. What else could it be? Maybe the old bones of the house had cracked with age, allowing the wind to squirm its way in. I had no idea. I shook my head and walked out, thinking I'd investigate it later when my wife was up. It was a beautiful morning, one that was warm and smelled of grass. I would have enjoyed it more had I not been so focused on the cold spot that had inexplicably appeared in my bedroom. Why was it so chilly when the day itself was this warm? Had the walls cooled the air down as it wriggled into the house? The temperature difference was too stark to be explained away like this. I found myself strangely fixated on the cold spot, so much so that I hadn't even realized that I'd finished my run and had made it all the way back home. I wasn't the only one affected by it. As I entered the house, wiping beads of sweat off my brow, I found my wife in her bedroom, standing near the door with a frown marring her once beautiful face. There's a cold spot here, she remarked. I know. It's weird. She cut me off. I don't like it. Get rid of it. I opened my mouth to say that I would, but she'd already turned away and marched off to our daughter's room. Breakfast was an odd affair that morning. As our daughter sat chattering away about some inane middle school gossip, my wife chewed on her cereal, slowly, deliberately, like she wanted to take the time to contemplate on its taste. Why is it there, anyway? She asked, abruptly cutting off our daughter's ramblings. I shrugged. I don't know, really. Of course you don't, she spat. I frowned. Now, you don't have to... Get rid of it, she said, and walked off, leaving behind her bowl of unfinished cereal. My daughter looked at me questioningly. I told her to finish her food. I couldn't focus much on work that day. Every time the air conditioner swung my way and blasted me in the face with freezing air, my mind instantly reverted to that damn cold spot. My co-workers were concerned, said I was too distracted. I brushed their concerns aside, but couldn't really get into my usual groove. I finally threw my hands up and got in touch with a plumber and a carpenter. The sooner I got rid of that thing, the sooner I'd be able to get on with my life. Do you think there's something wrong with the air ducts? I asked a friend and co-worker while I watched him pour coffee into his mug, with wisps of steam rising up hypnotically. It was warm, comforting, unlike the... I don't know, I mumbled. It's too cold. Colder than what should be possible. Huh, he said. Weird. I finished early that day and returned home, whistling a half-forgotten tune in the cold car. I grunted and switched the AC off about halfway into the journey. Back home, I found my wife sitting on the couch in the living room. She'd been waiting for me. "Did anyone swing by today?" I asked. Jaw clenched, she glared at me. "Yes," she replied. I noticed her body shivering, as if she'd been exposed to low temperatures for a long time. "Couldn't fix it." Her teeth were chattering. "But of course they can't. How do you expect outsiders to come and tell you what to do? It's your house. Fix it yourself." My mouth felt dry, like all the moisture had been sucked out by a saliva ejector. "You're really cold. Have you been standing under it?" Her face warped into a snarl, crow's feet sharpening like claws. "Someone here has to, right? I don't want to, but someone's got to remember what's wrong here." I gawped at her. "What? That doesn't make any sense. You don't have to stand anywhere." She groaned in frustration and got up to leave. "Hey, wait." I grabbed her hand to stop her and instantly released it. It was like clutching at a lump of ice. It stung the skin on my palm. What had she been doing when I was at work? She marched off to the doorway and stood there, her back facing me. Her body vibrated as the cold crashed into her. I took my jacket off and ran towards the door. "Stop," I said, wrapping the jacket around her. "What the fuck are you doing?" She shrieked and violently tried to throw the jacket off. Ignoring the biting cold scraping at my flesh, I tried to push her away from that cold spot, away from this obsessive madness. She screeched, slapped and clawed at me, but I used my brute strength to carry her away from there. Heart pounding in my chest, I backed her into a corner of the bedroom. Past the disheveled hair falling down on her face, I saw her eyes flitting around like a cornered rat. "Stop! Stop!" I yelled, fear and desperation clear in my cracked voice. "Please, stop this shit and talk to me." She took a step back, spread her arms out on the walls like a spider, and glared at me. Teeth gritted, nose scrunched up, veins of her neck stretched painfully. She looked at me with such hatred it made my knees wobble. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what was happening here. It was so bizarre. None of it made any sense. "Please, honey," I whispered. "Stop." She screamed and ran into me and past me. She shoved me aside and ran faster than I'd ever seen her run before coming to an abrupt halt at the doorway. Shivering and whimpering, she stood there. Despite the pain, despite how weird it was, she stood there like her life depended on it. "What are you doing?" I asked, exasperated as I tried to wrench her off her spot once again. She fought like a woman possessed as I heaved her onto my shoulders and carried her off to the living room before dumping her on the couch. "Let me go! Let me go!" she said, slapping at my hands. "Let me go!" I caught hold of her wrists and pulled her hands above her head, effectively restraining her. She opened her mouth and her chest started quaking as she began sobbing. "Please, please, let me go. I have to go. I have to go. I have to go." I blinked and fought back tears. "Baby, you're scaring me. What's happening? What's wrong?" I have to go. I have to go." "Why, damn it? Why?" I have to. I have to. She writhed under me, using all her strength to free herself, but I held on for dear life. Well, I hit the gym daily and so happened to be stronger than the average man, but believe me when I tell you, I had to use every bit of my strength to hold her down. But hold her down I did. And slowly, the fight left her until she was crying and mumbling nonsense under her breath. When it looked like she'd calmed down, I got her some water to drink. "I have to stand there," she explained after gulping down a glass of lukewarm water. "I feel it in my bones. Something terrible is going to happen if I don't. I tried to reason with her. Nothing's going to happen, okay? It's just air. Air that can make you sick if you stand exposed to it for too long. But that's all there is to it. You don't understand. You don't get it. There's nothing wrong here, I continued. Just a random cold spot, and we'll get it fixed, okay? Nothing to worry about. Tears pooled in her eyes. I don't want to do it, she cried. I don't want to stand there. Please, don't make me. What the fuck? Look, I'm not going to force you to do anything. But I have to, she insisted. I have to. Was she having a nervous breakdown? Was that what this was? It's okay. I hugged her and she grabbed onto me like I was a life jacket. I kept a close eye on her for the rest of the day. Didn't let her out of sight until we'd finished dinner, tucked our daughter into bed and retired to the guest room, shutting the door behind us. There was no way we were going to sleep in that room, and thankfully my wife didn't insist on it. She calmed down since her outburst and was no longer fighting to stand in the doorway. But I took no chances and kept her within arm's reach. I craned my neck and looked at our bedroom once before locking the guest room door shut. And chills ran down my spine when I noticed a faint mist at the cold spot. I shook my head to clear it of cobwebs of doubt and confusion. Just a cold spot. Nothing more. My wife was not well, and I promised myself to book an appointment with a therapist for the next day. It was just a cold spot. We fell asleep with me on my back and her head on my chest. I woke up to an odd and rhythmic thumping sound. I sat up with a start and saw my wife standing at the door, softly banging her head against it. I checked the time on my phone. Just past midnight. Was she sleepwalking? Was this also a part of her sickness? I don't know. It creeped me out to think that even her subconscious was forcing her to move towards the cold spot. I got out of bed and walked towards her to bring her back to bed. Now, I didn't have a lot of expertise with dealing with people who sleepwalk, so I did what instinct told me to do. I placed my hand on her forehead and began gently redirecting her towards the bed. As I got her to lie down on the bed, though, I heard something outside. I strained my ears to listen carefully. Silence. Must have been my imagination, I thought, as I settled into the bed once again. It was morning when I woke up next. Sunlight was streaming in through the windows and falling on my face. I yawned and stretched my arms, and noticed that I was cold and alone in bed. Oh, fuck. Adrenaline flooded my body. I rolled out of the bed and ran out the door. There she was. Not at the bedroom door, thankfully, but sitting listlessly on a wooden chair, facing the damn thing. I could see the side of her face. It was blank, like the life had been drained out of it. I glanced at what she was looking at, and it froze my heart. My clammy hands fell to my sides and shook like leaves in the wind. I stumbled forward, not wanting to confirm what I feared, yet knowing that I absolutely had to. I approached the door, and my eyes fell upon the big, misshapen lump of ice under it. It came up to my waist, and was about as thick as a washing machine. I bent and looked at it closely, and my stomach dropped. Oh, dear God. There was a strong gust of cold wind from above me, and the irregular lump of ice wobbled. No, no. I reached towards it to steady it, but it was too late. The thing crashed into the ground, shattering into a dozen pieces. A small basketball-sized chunk rolled over and stopped at my naked foot, the ice freezing my toes. But I didn't pay it any attention, because I was too busy looking at the lifeless eyes set in the frozen, decapitated head of my daughter. Shapeshifters. Most people easily remember their last conversation with a loved one before their death, just because it's the last they saw of them. But I don't remember my last conversation with my cousin Matt, solely because it was the last time I saw him. It was a rainy day. The air was foggy, a thick curtain of mist drowning the city. "Oh, coffee's real cold," he remarked, taking a sip from it. A few droplets poured onto the glass. We were seated inside a booth in a small coffee shop on the corner of a bustling city street. "Oh, we shouldn't have come here. Always crappy service," I responded. A mob of people held umbrellas and shielded themselves from the onslaught of water that burst from the sky. The clouds, which had been swollen and puffy during the last few days, had finally decided to let loose and rain hell upon the world. I took a sip from my glass of coffee and spat it back out, feeling cold droplets leak down my throat. I coughed. "It's terrible," I stated. "That was your idea to come here." "Yeah, last time I came, it was still better than this." "Hey, so, I know you wanted to talk about Carson," Matt said to me. I pursed my lips and nodded my head. "You want to talk to me about it?" "I want you to listen. First, Jackson's an ass. Try not to let him get to you too much." I frowned and looked outside again, watching the people go by, staring at their faces. Sore eyes, cheeks sleek with cheers, and solemn expressions. Leaning my head against the window and watching the crowd, I murmured to Matt. "Oh, he did everything for me, and then drifted away. Oh, before he fucked my girlfriend. People change, I guess. Oh, cold-hearted piece of..." One of the faces outside caught my eye. It was a man with dark hair and pronounced features. He flashed his pearly teeth, forming an ear-to-ear grin. Soulless, empty eyes that seemed to smile just as wide, though with looming purposelessness. He wore a sleek, yellow raincoat, sleek with rainfall. The hood was pulled over his head. His smile grew wider, and he stared at Matt. I shot Matt a glance, and he narrowed his eyes. The man began to walk across the street, coming closer to the coffee shop. He had a strange glow about him, as though the fog didn't affect him, and he could be seen clearly through it. He didn't check both ways when he crossed the street. A car, rolling down the road, honked when they almost crashed into him. But he continued to walk. "Who the hell is that, Matt? Matt, do you know him?" I asked. Matt only stared out the window, his jaw gaping. The man approached. He stood in place and he smiled. His eyes did not wander back and forth. No, they trained solely on Matt. My cousin stared back, his former squint turning into a prolonged gaze. He produced a weak, seemingly plastic smile in response. The man's teeth gleamed as the headlights of a passing car reflected off of it. He carefully turned around and walked away. The smile disappeared in an instant and replaced itself with the look of a soldier standing at attention. Matt and I trained our sights on the man as he walked away, off into the distance, out of our view. The mist consumed him, and he was gone. "Yeah, people change," Matt said after a long moment of silence. Then he stared at me. "We can talk about this in the car," I replied. We drove along the city streets. I explained it all to him. One of those typical, "oh, they ripped my heart out" conversations that last for hours and results in the realization that you don't need them anymore, them being my best friend and my girlfriend. I went home and tossed and turned for a while. My mind was still just as cloudy as the world was outside. I cleared the fog by watching reruns on TV. I closed my eyes halfway through an episode, and rest came eventually. I had work the next day, and went to that without a problem. Well, the week went on as usual. until I received a phone call later one night. One from my mother. I answered the phone and I could hear sobbing on the other end. "Mom! Mom, what's wrong?" She sniffled and spoke a few words. Emptiness. Emptiness is the one word I can use to describe it. I lowered my head, threw myself onto my bed, and laid there for hours. It was the calm before the storm, feeling nothing but a pit at the bottom of my stomach. Disbelief was still inhibiting realization. I didn't try to sleep and instead listened to Mumford & Sons, my favorite band, for much of that night. Time progressed. I started to punch my pillows. Then the funeral came. I walked over to the casket, knowing they kept it closed for morbid reasons. I'd heard enough about the grisly conditions they found him in. I begged God for change, for this to be just like Lazarus in the Bible. "Come forth, Lazarus, rise from the tomb," or whatever the hell it was he said. Well, I never used to pray, but that night I found myself praying as I drove home, praying as I showered, praying as I washed the dishes, and praying as I fell asleep. It was a storm cloud hanging over my head. Looking down would make it go away, but you could still hear the thunder. I skipped work for the rest of that week and came back the next Monday. Every few minutes something would distract me. I shook my leg, tried to keep it still, and then gave in to the shaking again. I tapped my pen against my desk and cracked the joints in my fingers. A computer screen sat before me. Images flashed on it. My girlfriend, Jackson, and Matt. My girlfriend, Taylor, and Jackson's smiles looked so fake compared to Matt's now. I went through my computer and deleted every single picture I had left of Jackson and Taylor. And this was followed by the memory of my cousin and I, sitting in the shop. Cold coffee, his face, the man's face, and his smile. That man walking into the mist. The moment where we shook hands and he patted me on the back and told me everything would be all right one last time. "Carson, you okay?" Somebody tapped me on the shoulder. I spun around, feeling myself choke up, and something wet drizzling down my cheek. I wiped it away and sniffled. "I'm so sorry for your loss. You can go home if you need to," my boss said calmly. "Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you for understanding, Mr. Johnson." "Carson, you know everyone just calls me Michael." "Sorry," I said, standing up. I pushed my chair in behind me, gathered my things, and started the walk for the parking lot, which was across from the office. More mist and rain. A sheet of water splashed over my shirt as a car passed me in the street, laying on their horn. They rolled their window down. "Watch where you're going, buddy," shouted a gruff voice. I didn't bother to look at who was driving. I looked to next to my car, unlocking the doors. Someone was parked in the spot next to mine who I'd never seen before. She had long blonde hair. She turned her head slowly, a smile growing on her lips. Chills coursed through me. I got into my sedan and shut the door, starting the car. I shot her one last glance, seeing her impossibly white teeth once more. I didn't smile or wave, and instead threw the car into drive and pulled forward out of my space, zoomed across the parking lot, then proceeded to cruise along the roads back to my apartment. I felt shivers running down my back as I thought of the woman in the car again, and that sickening smile that she wore. Her eyes never blinked. She didn't even seem to be breathing. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I threw the sheets off of me, feeling hot and cold rushes winding through my skin. Sweat pooled up in my armpits. I closed my eyes and tried to give in to the blackness. I managed to surrender myself to sleep in time. I woke up with a stuffy nose and a sore throat. I coughed and looked around my bedroom. It was still dark, with the light filtering in from the closed blinds, leaving everything a shade of grey and white. there was a looming shadow in the corner of my room, and I saw a whitish gleam coming from the silhouette, like a reflection or a trick of the light. I knew, though, that there wasn't a lamp or coat rack in that corner of the room. My heart pulsed a few times. I felt the blood circulating through me grow thicker, almost defensive, like archers lining a castle wall during a medieval siege. I jolted forward, glaring at the dark spot. It shifted. I felt eyes piercing into me. "Who's there?" I asked. Nothing in response. "I'm not playing any games," I said, my voice sounding withered and defeated. The gleam in the shadows faded away, and the darkness was broken apart as the sun began to shine brighter through the closed blinds. I sighed, stood up, and began to walk around my bedroom, pacing back and forth. The day continued on. I showed up to work and slugged through it all. I kicked my leg against the ground, tapping a pen against the table. That reminded me of the time Matt and I, during our history class in middle school, had gotten detention after we continued to tap our pens against our desks. The teacher had started off by giving us a warning, and by his third or fourth warning his face was tomato red and I thought steam would start blowing out of his ears. I remember the two of us laughing about it at lunch with Jackson. Lost in my thoughts, I almost didn't hear Michael behind me. Can you come to my office, Carson?" I set the pen down and turned around. Yeah, I'll be there in a moment." Michael didn't say another word and just walked away. I looked at him, only to see the back of his suit and his legs carrying him back to his office. I stood and followed, catching the eyes of my fellow employees as I went. I saw a smile flash at me, but didn't recognize who they were. I swallowed and then kept my head pointed down, watching the carpeted floor underneath my feet change colors as I entered another section of the office. Michael's door was left open, and I didn't bother to knock. He had multiple awards and trophies sat on the edge of his desk, a laptop open in front of him. He was leaning back in his chair and cracked his knuckles. "Have a seat," he said. He gestured to one of the chairs, sitting down like there was a nail about to jab into my ass, and stared at him. "This, isn't an easy conversation to have. You're a great worker and a great man, Carson. I'm not going to fire you. That's not what this is about. But I don't like seeing you this way. Oh, I miss the Carson that walks in and shouts 'Good morning' every day. I've got an offer to make you. I've got a good friend, Jenna Gray. She's a therapist. I'm sure I could get you an appointment with her for free, and maybe even multiple appointments without pay. If you don't go to her, at least do something. Read a motivational book. Get your feelings out. You know I'm here for you too, Carson. Take the time to heal, but don't let yourself get stuck in the mud. I miss your pranks and your energy." Noticing the silhouette of a trophy in the corner of the room, I nodded my head. I'm sorry. I know. There's nothing to be sorry for." I agreed to see Jenna sometime soon, and Michael told me he'd try and get an appointment or two set up. Work got out at 5. I walked across the street into the parking lot. Along the way I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up. Parked next to my car was a smiling woman, only this time I watched as her teeth parted and a snaking, inhuman tongue curled out from it. She didn't say anything, and flicked it at me. Flecks of spit shot between her teeth, and her eyes were stony and shiny like polished marble. I sprinted to my car and threw the door open. I launched myself into the driver's seat, stabbed the key into the ignition, and started the car. I peeled out of the lot. I didn't look back once and found my apartment using an alternate route. Once inside, I sat at the kitchen table. I cradled my face in my hands, rubbed my eyes, and looked around. I hadn't turned any of the lights on yet. Greyish light covered the apartment. I turned on a small lamp in the kitchen's corner and leaned against the wall. The next day after work, I went to my appointment to go see Jenna. The fog had broken apart during the afternoon. The horizon was painted sky blue, and a glowing yellow plate hung in the sky, beaming rays of sunshine down on my skin. The cool breeze twisted through the air as I stepped out of my car, closing the door behind me. There were a few windows spaced out between the drab bricks. A bell rang as the door opened. There was a mother watching her son play with trucks on the floor. His hair was matted and his clothes were wrinkled. There were bags underneath his eyes. I stood and watched the boy play for a while. When the mother looked up at me, I almost expected a smile to spread wide across her face. I found nothing but a frown and two hazy eyes staring back at me. I stared for a moment, and then I blinked and found a seat. There was a door on the left with a plaque on it that read, "Jenna Gray," in thick golden letters. My sight was trained on the two words like a sniper following its target. I turned my head to look outside again. The sunlight disappeared as a fluffy, grey cloud loomed closer, reminding me of warships. The door squeaked, and my head snapped back to the plaque. A filthy, unshaven man coughed and thanked Jenna as he stepped out of her room. With the man gone, I saw Jenna in the doorframe. Her long blonde hair almost covered her face-wide grin, and her teeth sparkled, bathed in the dim light of the office. She didn't speak a word to me. I began to take steps backwards, my breath coming in gasps. I felt the collective eyes of the other clients in the waiting room all staring at me. Jenna's mouth opened, and her tongue began to slither out from between her red lipstick. I don't remember the seconds between sprinting from the office and getting home. I just remember lying in my bed, naked and shivering from a cold shower, thinking to myself, the woman in the car. I came to work the day after and performed worse than I ever had since John had died. I'd woken up early and parked, and planned to leave late too. Came to work the day after and performed worse than I ever had since Matt died. I'd woken up early and parked, and planned to leave late too. While I was at work, I researched and found Jenna Gray's website, and looked for a photo of her on it. Jenna had brunette hair instead of blonde. Different eye colors and facial structures too. In the middle of the day, I fell half asleep. And when I woke up, thunder cracked and wind screamed all around me. Blue stripes of lightning could be seen through my open window. Rain spilled in as the woman climbed through, the smile still stuck onto her face. I curled into a ball on the other side of the room, clutching a knife in my hand. I pointed it at her and muttered, "I'm not playing any games." Nothing in return but that smile. I blinked the sleep out of my eyes and looked around the office. Nobody was making any phone calls, and there was no conversation across the room between co-workers. Only the sound of fingertips hitting their keyboards. My head throbbed, and I winced. Thought about trying to go home. I remembered how many days I'd already taken off. I think I managed to create the illusion of productivity, writing a few expense reports, long breaks of pen tapping in between each paragraph. I listened to the clock in the cubicle as it ticked with each passing second. My shaky hands produced errors twice as often as they had the day before. I found myself deleting whole sentences and retyping them. Doing good, Carson. Michael patted me on the back. You've got this. I nodded my head. Thanks, Michael. I felt him walk away and didn't turn to look. Michael told me I needed to go home when I asked to stay longer. I swallowed, but didn't argue. I clocked out and crossed the street with a thumping heart. I could see that familiar car parked next to my own. I reached into my pocket, produced my phone, and turned on the camera app. I took longer strides than usual, and then I was at the woman's window. She was still there. Her teeth were the first thing I saw. Tongue unfurled itself like a scroll opening. Slobber dripped from her lower lip. I snapped a picture of her and then jammed myself into the driver's seat. The car was in reverse and out of the parking lot in seconds. Oh, I almost hit a pedestrian on the way out. I heard their shouts echoing from behind me. Shivers raced through my body. The shaking fit continued until I reached the apartment and parking lot. I didn't park the car. I held a foot on the brake instead. I opened the photo app. The woman was outlined with static, as if she'd been there in the photo, but was cropped out. My stomach flipped like a pancake. I didn't sleep whatsoever that night. The light seeping through my blinds was enough to make me jump. My hands trembled and a layer of cold sweat covered me. The headache never left. My body felt spring-loaded, like my bones were going to shoot through my skin. I ate breakfast in a hurry the next morning and parked my car in a small lot, just down the street from my office building. The street lamp nearby provided enough dull orange light for me to use the stick of deodorant I kept in the glove box. I'd forgotten to shower. Tires rolled across the concrete. My eyes shot over and met another pair of eyes. Stone, cold eyes. I threw my door open, closed it and locked the doors. I heard another car lock, looked back and saw the woman standing outside of her car. Her mouth formed a toothless grin. 2 tongues slipped out this time. I checked her license plate. There was no number on it, just a sheet of white metal. I sprinted into the office. I didn't get a lot of work done the next day. I took the most pen-tapping breaks that I ever had. Michael appeared behind me again, clapping a hand on my shoulder. He murmured his congratulations and sauntered off back to his office. I looked outside as a flock of crows, like little fighter jets, soared by. I ate a cold ham sandwich for lunch and then went back to work. I stared at the crumpled up wrapper that sat in the trash can, shook my head and tapped my pen against the desk. I felt a hand on my shoulder, turning around to see Matt. He was only there for a second, long enough for me to see the crazed grin on his face before he disappeared. I froze, my mouth gaping open. My heart jumped a few times. The day started to come to a close. People would get to the office. Intentionally, I left one large task undone. "Well, do you think you're well enough to get it done tonight?" Michael asked, tossing me the keys to the office. "I'll try. No promises." My throat was dry. "All right, you can lock up then. Thank you, Carson. Lots of respect for you." "Yeah," I replied. He left the office. I heard the door closing behind him and looked around my cubicle. There was a picture frame in the back corner, with papers piled on top of it. I reached out, brushing the pages aside. Underneath was a framed photograph of Jackson and I on the first day of 6th grade. I stared at him, mostly. His blonde hair was spiked and crusty with gel. Now his face appeared devilish, like that of a mischievous kid. Oh, I wished he was in front of me right now. My hands needed to beat something. Glass shards stuck out of my bloodied knuckles after I brought my fist against the picture 4 or 5 times. With the glass broken, I tore out the photograph inside. My hands ripped it to pieces without me having to think about it. I dropped the remains over the trash bucket in my corner, and they drifted down like snowflakes. I launched the wooden frame into the trash afterwards. My breath came in shaky gasps now. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. I heard scratching from across the office. It didn't rouse me, though. But then the scratches came again, louder. My head shot up. I squinted and looked at the window on the other side of the office. Most of the lights were out, leaving the building a dim, lifeless color. Fog had built up outside, and rain poured down in sheets. Raindrops raced down the glass. A message scratched into the glass was lit up in the window. I shook my head. The urge to stay sitting was powerful, but curiosity yanked me by the hair and dragged me over to the scratches on the window. My first thought was, it's just a nightmare, Carson. It's a fucking nightmare and nothing more. So don't go screaming, running out of here. Written from the inside of the office, it read, "You don't smile back." The balloon that had been inflating since that day in the coffee shop with Matt had just burst. I heard a loud pop in the back of my head. I ran back to my desk, gathered my things and dashed out of the office, shutting off all the lights as I went. I locked the door behind me, crossed the parking lot and got into my car. The woman's car wasn't there. The next thing I remembered was being back in my apartment. I'm still there as I write this. I've gone to work every single day for 3 days and haven't seen the woman once. I've seen her in my dreams almost every night. It's just a replay of that nightmarish dream I had during work. Rolling thunder, howling wind, pouring rain. Her in the windowsill, climbing in, while I cower in the corner with a blade I'm too afraid to use. That sensation of being spring-loaded has grown. Matt's cause of death was never released. I think I understand why now. Yesterday, my other cousin, Grant, gave me a call. I answered the phone with a grumbling. "Hey, Grant." "Carson, how are you holding up, man?" I drew in a deep sigh. I looked out the window next to me, watching the crows find their way through the fog. "Holding up, I guess." I heard Grant swallow through the static. "Listen, Carson, I've got some fucked up news for you about Matt." I waited. A few more crows flapped by, this time closer to my window. What is it?" I stammered. Grant's words came out choked. "His bones stabbed through his skin, Carson, like his body couldn't contain them. That's how he died." It was like a rotten, decomposing hole in my chest had begun to gnaw away at my flesh. A few more crows flew by the window. This time there was something on the glass. A smiley face was scratched into it. Done from the inside. So, my dear friends, tonight's video is dedicated to the one and only Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Now, just a couple of days ago, somebody hacked this channel. They removed all of the videos and replaced it with some generic, crap. So, it was an absolute nightmare, basically. 8 years of work seemingly down the drain. Now, fortunately, it looks like the situation has been recovered. The channel's up and running, but there are still behind-the-scenes nightmares going on. And I've worked with this channel, and okay, you can tell that I'm a bit frustrated about this. Years and years of dedicated hard work have gone into this, and for someone to be able to bypass all the security and take it over really sucks. So can you do me a favor? Go to the link I've put below, drop by, say hello, offer a bit of support. That's all I want. Thanks, guys. Well, that's another Sunday through. Back again tomorrow with something very special for you. Till then, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.